set it up so I'm like,
Okay, so,
Oh, you're right.
so
I zoom
folks,
in on
do you
Yeah.
with the nose here?
Joey's not in the room, but
That might be important to wait on. She might be in the bathroom.
Yes.
I would like to say congratulations for getting through that in less time than we had allocated and really making some positive changes, I think, to the recommendations to make them really strong. And as we strove to do at the beginning of this process, we reached near unanimous consensus on this slate of recommendations. One could argue that abstention does not take away
I was
from
going to say, we could give him a chance to take it back.
Can I explain my vote?
Yeah, sure.
It was so many changes in language and so many variables of what would be the final product that I did not personally feel comfortable voting on something I could not read and saw, and yet was out of my hands in terms of being used. It's not in any way a reflection of my approval or disapproval of the validity. I agree with all concepts and steps suggested in that section. Simply not going to vote on things that I do not know. Complete principles, yeah. So
I think we all discussed that, so. Anyway, I'm glad
I didn't realize it was a problem.
He was punchy, he was punchy at the last moment. He's much better now.
You took the position that if we all had more time, we probably all should. Appreciate that.
So, I want to introduce this conversation around, folks got an email from Joey a few days ago describing her concern that what happens if we are implementing a number of these pieces and we don't know which parts are going to move forward. We're actually not seeing greenhouse gas emissions. Peter's reduction. Peter described the fact that in the last few years, despite the good work in the state energy plan, good work in state government, we're still seeing significant rise in greenhouse gas emissions. There's deep concern among a number of us about that, probably all of us would, and we'd like to see change on that. When we built the introduction and sort of the financial conclusion section of the report, we talked about the big picture that this issue is for Vermont and its future. And in the conclusion, we described that we need to think about, when we had sent to the governor to evaluate potentials for capping emissions or being involved in carbon trading, we put out the notion that Vermont should look at those opportunities. And the governor responded that it was really important to think of these as national issues. And you'll remember by reviewing that, hopefully everybody's read that really carefully, that we're suggesting that we have a responsibility to lead to the extent that's within our power, and that we could look at regional organizations, and we could look at work that's being done in other states and provinces today. And we didn't make a hard recommendation about particular action there, but we said that we encourage the governor's leadership, we praise the leadership that's come to get us to this point. And it's a very positive affirmation in the statement, but it does encourage us to look at those kinds of structures. In reviewing the report, Joey pointed out to all of us that we could be producing this report and not see greenhouse gas emissions change dramatically, and that would be a fairly significant thing if that was going on over time. So she sent us some language that she thought about, and Peter and I looked at it together, and we thought that that for us to add stronger language in the introduction without having a conversation about it would be inappropriate. But that if we were going to have stronger language in the introduction, that would be something that we could amend into it. So I agreed to work with Joey to look at that language and to frame it in a way that seemed coherent, seemed to fit with our conclusion, and was a positive, affirmative way of looking at these these issues. And so I've done that, and at this point, I would pass this around as kind of a group project, because it connects with a lot of the thinking we've had at the table in general to to me, at least from my ear. And I would propose that we add this language to our introduction, close to and beneath the graph that comes from EAS and the state figures that show where we are with emissions. I'll give you all a minute to read it, but it might be worth it reading it aloud too.
The extras on the one.
So for the sake of discussion, I would make a motion that we adopt this language into the introduction.
So help me understand, please, we go business
Someone
by
should
business.
probably, at this point, someone should
I'll
probably
second that
second.
motion so we know who's action.
And I'll leave it to Peter, since it's okay.
Right.
I don't understand the cap. You're gonna go to my business and say, you're capped, and then if we go over on 1 year, we pay a tax, another tax. Is that it?
That, well, the problem with this sort of generic language is it doesn't say how it functions. That's not the way it functions in other states and in other sectors, but it is a specific way that it can be done. That's more of a straight regulatory piece where it just said, individual entities are capped in their emissions. That's typically not the way it's done, but it's certainly probably the most draconian of ways to do it.
Well, as a business owner that invests a lot of money and moving forward and continually doing better, I don't like it.
How is it?
So for a larger sort of economy-wide cap and trade system, we'll take that as an example. You would have the cap is usually set at the sort of wholesale fuel delivery level, and emissions are capped there. So that there's a sort of a smaller audience of people, and then that the cost of complying with that cap or trading for that cap would then be passed on to customers accordingly.
Can I just back up for a bit to
Yeah.
contextualize a little more? So when I had written, it was in response to the recent news, which I had in trouble, I guess, you noted, that we're not meeting our targets, in fact, nowhere near meeting our targets. And so, from my perspective, it is my hope that this is a foundation of good work that actually does bend the curve. And I was offering that as an idea to explore with you, a cap, but it wasn't certainly, and clearly a cap is achieved through a variety of different mechanisms that I wasn't prescribing how, what I was suggesting is that we need some accountability, like to ourselves and to the commitment that we have. I would say that I would look towards like Massachusetts and Connecticut, which it's a different example, but they have something called the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is, it's not a cap, it's a statute that they have their goals incorporated in statute, and they are obligated to meet those goals through a variety of means. So they are enabled to be creative in how they meet those goals, but they actually have accountability. So I just use that as an example, like I wasn't prescribing how, I just think that at this moment in time, A, we need to recognize those new numbers in the report, and then B, I think something like this, which Paul's offering, and I think could be that sort of framework to enable the market to respond to actually drive down emissions. So, you can meet the cap in many ways.
I think that's a good discussion in terms of coming back at Joe.
What is the reason for the rise? The reason for this causing?
We saw emissions rise across the board, really. A big chunk of the rise, interestingly enough, came in the electricity sector, maybe on, so you can speak to some.
Transportation and building heating were, again, the two biggest sectors. Transportation is mostly driven by the vehicle miles traveled, fuel use, and the building heating was driven by the kind of winter heating demand, which was up in the 2014, 2015 years.
That's good.
And a hugely important factor, price of oil dropped significantly after 2014, and that led to a lot of shifts away from folks burning wood, for example, to burn the fossil fuel. It's changed the vehicle purchase pattern. So those, those are these direct observations, but that fundamental drop in the price of oil has led to greater consumption of oil.
And why are there more vehicle miles?
Not
What costs
sure
less
exactly,
people?
but
Gas is cheap,
Yes.
like we,
housing's unaffordable, so people live 50 miles from work,
and lifestyle
etc.
choices.
Yeah.
You have vehicles.
Yep. And
So, there's two concepts in here, a cap and then a gradual stage reduction. What is a gradual stage reduction?
So essentially, it continues, it lowers the cap to your goal, right? You set it at a, what you think is sort of reasonable to achieve in a sort of near-term future, and then it ticks down from there to get to where you're aiming. At least that's.
So it's a cap, and then the cap gets pushed down harder.
As more efficiencies come online in response to the cap.
Yeah, the basic thing is we don't need to get there tomorrow, but we need to get there over the course of time. And so there's a process that gets there. I guess fundamentally, my question for the group is, are we, by saying something like this, undermining the work that we've done, right? To say that we get that in 2015 emissions went up. We don't know what's happened exactly between 2016 and 2018. And our recommendations haven't necessarily come into effect yet. I guess that's my one concern about this approach.
I think there's several other things that are suggested here. One is that there's a recommendation for a check and a trigger. You say, look, I think there's an acknowledgement that even with all these recommendations, we may not hit this target. I don't know that these recommendations, by the time they're implemented, whether you can even measure whether they're having an effect for years. The length of the trigger, might be fairly short. But I think that this is acknowledging what we've all sort of known in the background, that there's a lot of great ideas. This all should be done, but it may not be sufficient to meet the goals. So check this again. If it's not sufficient, the second half of this is saying, here's what you should do as a recommendation. If it's not sufficient, it may be that we can change this to say, we should have a trigger. We should acknowledge that this may not be enough. We should check this. Here's a measurable point trigger to check in, and if it's not, we need to do something more. You've got other processes. There's a section in the back that talks about this, the issue of cap and trade, and there's sort of some softer language around these ideas. But maybe how to do it should be left for this future committee, commission, after 3 years and more data and work on this, and people working on it, and come back and say, here's what to do. We all know cap and trade is one way to do it, but there could be variations of that that are effectively cap and trade.
The other piece to keep in mind is the study that we recommended in the first round is going forward, and the RFP is out on the streets from JFO right now. So
You mean on carbon tax?
that looks at the various options associated with ways to decarbonize our economy.
Wait, did you?
So I really think, as we were going through the report and looking at the
draft recommendations, I really appreciated that the first thing in the appendix was the executive order, just as a reminder of the language. And the first whereas references the 2016 Comprehensive Energy Plan, saying Vermont is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And then in the therefore be it resolved, the governor reaffirming Vermont's commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors of the economy in line with that. My feeling from just a purely objective analytical perspective of what the numbers are saying is that given our much higher emissions numbers as of 2015, and given the lack in some of the recommendations of specific targets, it's not possible to have confidence that even if all of the recommendations we're putting forward were implemented, that they would achieve the level of emissions reduction that the governor outlined in his charge to this commission. So for that reason, adding a specific recommendation of an emissions cap would be the only recommendation we could make that would ensure the result that the governor asked for and that the governor and the state desires. Otherwise, it's a crapshoot. Otherwise, it's entirely possible we could implement the vast majority of these recommendations, and that curve keeps going up. The beauty of just saying a cap, but then not getting any more specific, is there are many, many different ways to implement a cap. You can do it afterwards, you can do it through straight regulation that doesn't involve pricing at all. You can do it through cap and trade, you can do it through carbon pricing. There are many, many different avenues after you've decided to put on a cap. But if you don't put on a cap at some point, there's no way to ensure that you get the desired level of emission reduction.
And I see the math. I think one of the things that we all need to remind ourselves of is that we made the decision that we weren't going to create the full suite of recommendations that we think needed to be to get there. So the math was never intended to add up to meet those goals. And included in the executive order are all the other pieces that we're supposed to factor into this. And so I do think that the math probably may not work. We certainly can't guarantee that it's going to work, but we need to remember that wasn't the only thing, and we agreed to think about this for a prioritization exercise.
I was just going to ask if would the idea of a cap that if we aren't specific, like I want this to be something that's going to make sense for you and like
Or anyone that owns a business
Right,
or is
no.
thinking of coming to Vermont,
Yeah, no,
it's
exactly.
already a very
Yeah.
horrible place to have a business.
Here's the
I
thing.
don't want anything to do with something negative at the front end of this.
So any cap whatsoever would be bad, or is it just a matter of the way?
I think,
it's
no, I don't think in general it's a bad
Yeah,
idea.
yeah.
That's not what I mean. I just don't want it to be part of this report, so that, I'm gonna vote no against it.
A cap without context, and that's just what you're saying, Jared, about keeping it vague, because it can be a lot of different things. But a cap without context throws this whole process in jeopardy. A cap, what, we're capping development? We have the thermostat police come down and turn down the temperature? We're gonna price the carbon tax on fuel oil? How are we gonna police the borders? I mean, there's a lot of good things in this report. I know I'm late to the game, and I realize I'm watching my own funeral here. But it seems to be that you don't throw this at the last possible moment.
All right, so the first paragraph, I think, is perfectly appropriate. It's a factual account of what we have happening, and I agree with the.
It's really hard to hear.
Sorry, I was saying the first paragraph is really factual, in my opinion, and appropriate, and it would be regrettable if we didn't acknowledge as much in this report. But I think it should be used to introduce an aspiration. I am not comfortable with introducing an outcome in the second paragraph that is so precise and so freighted, especially when the rest of this report has been more measured and has come up with solutions or suggestions that take us in the right direction. appreciate all of the expertise in this room, but if I were called upon to make a decision on capital findings on the basis of what has caused these emissions to rise, I would not do that on the basis of what you folks just said. I would want something more robust before I drew those conclusions. It's not to say it's not so. I'm just saying that I don't think that's been the nature of the deliberations that have been had for these many months. And I think this is a very aggressive redirection of the general direction this group is going in. I appreciate the urgency, generally, I have great respect for your work, but this is basically kidnapping our process and our plans.
Well, just a couple things. First of all, I think this warranted discussion a long time ago, and we've never, despite it being moving towards some ambitious policy like this being the #1 recommendation that the public offered, we never had the opportunity to have a fair conversation about what it is or what it could be. So I'm not putting this out at the last minute, I'm putting it out as we need to be credible in what we're offering in terms of response to the governor, and despite the fact that I think we're putting forward some really good stuff, I think that it's not collectively, cumulatively anywhere near the new reality. And I think that there are tons of recommendations in here that we don't have fundamental answers to, including how we're going to do that, whether that's an incentive or otherwise. So I think, like I said before, a cap was just one way to approach that. I was open to any other ideas, and I still am. I think a cap on emissions is fundamentally where the world is going and where we ultimately need to go. And I don't think putting out a report that doesn't recognize that and that ultimately is just nibbling around the edges, even though there is some really robust stuff in here. Especially because in the regulated sector, the electric sector, we have policies that are driving change and innovation. We have utilities that are supporting it, embracing it. In the unregulated sector, my hope is that the pool dealers thrive and survive. But it ultimately we need policy pushes in that direction. So we are falling short in the unregulated fuel sector. So unless we do something significant, I think this is radically falling short. And it's not credible without an acknowledgement of something far more significant needing to happen.
Going off of Peter's concern that this undermines the credibility, I think that it's important to realize that this isn't a recommendation for a cap. It's saying that if there isn't significant process from these recommendations and from the other things that will happen, that we put a cap if we don't get to that, if we don't meet that goal. And so the idea, I think we would all be thrilled if these recommendations go into place and we see greenhouse gas emission drops that are equal to the goal that we've set out. But I think it's like, this is just a surefire way to make sure that if this fails, we have a safety net, but that safety net doesn't have to be put in place unless this fails.
So Harris, I very much appreciate what you just said. What you described is a contingent solution. If something doesn't happen, then that's good. But you said it's a surefire way. And what I just finished saying was that I don't know that. I don't know that on the basis of what we've done in this study. And Joey, respectfully, you just said, we never had an opportunity to discuss this.
Not as a full commission.
That's
really.
correct. And so let's just concede for a moment that that discussion didn't happen, okay? That's my point. This is a very specific recommendation to be making that frankly, in my view, overrides anything else we've done in this report. And to institute that without that discussion, without it having been at the center of what this group is doing, I think grossly distorts the outcome of our process. I think it would be better to try to make this aspirational. At a minimum, Vermont should consider instituting, Vermont should explore the viability of instituting a cap. But to say just outright, yeah, if this doesn't happen, a surefire way that we haven't tested, we don't have what I consider to be an actual basis to conclude a surefire And then just say outright it should be instituted, and I just, something.
The other factor to consider is that if we use the 3-year timeline, we'll be using data from right now before any of the work that we have suggested would go into effect.
When's the next data coming out?
2021, that one just seems.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality. There's at best a 3-year lag in the data. Some of it is not perfectly there for the complete data set.
I have a suggestion, I guess. I'm wondering if we can't keep, edit the first paragraph, acknowledging the facts, maybe talk about a trigger that's a little further out, and just soften the language and institute other measures such as a cap or something. We talk about there's a study being done, again, that contingent measure that something else has to be done, as opposed to saying, do this. This is a trigger. I don't disagree with that statement. I just don't know that that's going to be helpful for us. A lot can change in 3 years, we're talking 5 years. So if this was sort of softened as a contingent measure, I feel more comfortable with that.
I kind of like the way Jude put it in terms of the idea of, 3 years from now is a long time. We haven't described what kind of cap we're actually talking about. Should explore so instead of the word institute, Vermont should explore the viability of instituting a cap on greenhouse gas emissions. It's a little softer. It leaves discretion, but it calls on the governor for leadership. My fundamental reason for supporting this is that I do think we have a historic opportunity. I think that if we don't, if in 3 years emissions are not going down, if in 2021 emissions are not going down, we see that, and we had an opportunity to say something important around the potential of taking a significant step. We didn't do it. We're gonna hold that regret. When things are going wrong, and things go wrong incrementally, and you stand by, then you are responsible. And if in 3 years emissions are still going up, and we did our best as a commission, but it didn't impact, then that's a tragedy. And I look my kids and my grandkids in the eye and I say, well, we were the generation that went along and didn't make waves. I don't want to be that person. And I know that this is emotional for all of us in a lot of different ways. We all wear different hats and have different responsibilities and constituencies, and I respect that. And I respect whatever judgment you need to make personally. I'm going to be for you. I'm going to be for you because I respect each of you. But I can't not propose it. I continue to propose it, but I would amend it to soften that particular language, to explore the viability of instituting. But it would still say we should be looking at this. We should be talking to the Western Coalition. We should be talking to Quebec. We should be talking to California. Other places with robust economies and dynamic green strategies are moving forward with caps, and they're not crying about it. They're doing fine, and they're making significant progress. The other thing is the governor may not want to see this particular language, but again, it's not our job to please somebody or to say what they want to hear. Our job is to be honest to our point in history and take our best shot at saying what we think is true in a positive way. And to me, if we're not stopping our emissions, we got to cap them. we got to cap them. If we're not stopping them, eventually we got to have to cap them. That's basically why I agree to this.
Michelle, and then Bethany.
I think there's a lack of public understanding about the term cap and trade, and any other related terminology. And I think that to place that word at the very introduction to this report could create a trigger that would provide people the opportunity to not take other elements of the report seriously and move them forward. I think I would rather see this instead of using the word cap, use aggressive measures or something, some different terminology, and then have a recommendation in the body of the report that specifies, that sort of loops us back to the fact that we had this rise, we're going to be monitoring it. There may be a point in time where aggressive measures may be called for, and here are some of the areas in terms of beginning to explore measures, aggressive measures other states are taking, and education and dialogue that is required to lay the groundwork for the public discussion about aggressive measures that may be required in the future, so that we are beginning to bring the public along in understanding what these terms and what some of these future measures are that other states are taking in the event that we have to take them too.
So, can I offer a suggestion? We are essentially talking about, when we get into specifics, we're talking about the study that we recommended, right? And it should be a consideration of, pending the results of the study, exploring what, additional measures might be needed to ease the, to assist in the transition that we're trying to achieve. We've come up with recommendations that are action-oriented to come up with solutions. The cap is a forcing mechanism. It's not the solution in of itself. All these changes still individually have to happen. And so we're creating measures that drive those individual choices. I don't think there's any, so I think I wholeheartedly disagree with the fact that we're nibbling at the edges. We're getting into the meat and potatoes of this. The cap is sort of it's a function, it's a way to get there, it's a way to drive the behavior change if we're not seeing it on its own, but it's not the change itself. And so I have a hard time I think if we were gonna put this forward, we might as well not submit the rest of the report, right? It's not, to me, this is, okay, if the answer is a cap, then the answer is a cap. Sorry, I jumped in, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I guess I have a lot of things in my mind right now. I guess this, we start off saying despite strong stakeholder and focus on transforming our energy system, that our gas emissions have increased dramatically. And I feel like we have to somehow address that despite our best efforts over the last 20-something years, we are not making it better, and we are now presenting a bunch more recommendations. And I feel like we either have to have faith in them that they're going to do their job. So I don't know if we do or not as a commission, but if we're basically acknowledging that all past efforts haven't done anything, I think or sure enough, then I think we somehow need to address that piece of. Why are we even doing this? Why are we adding more recommendations? Because there's already been a bunch of strong recommendations and strong, what are we saying, state goals and, trying to transform our energy system, and that hasn't happened. So, I don't know, I think we need something.
Liz had her hand up a while
Yeah,
ago.
Liz, no. I'm gonna get spanked.
Few thoughts. I think the first paragraph is important. I feel an obligation that this information is out. How can we not use this opportunity to raise awareness? And I think it's going to be shocking, enlightening for many people who may have been lulled into a false sense of security, thinking that we're doing better than we are. I don't know if it's possible, but I found the brief little discussion that we had where we were talking about contributing factors is really also valuable and important. Whether we're in a position to include that in an introduction or whether it's appropriate to get that detailed, I don't know. But I think it's really important that those conversations start happening, talking about the implications of jobs and fuel costs and winter heating demand going up due to temperature shifts, vehicle miles. It's an opportunity for us to help people have a deeper understanding of why we're not heading in the right direction. And I also appreciate that we've already put forward a recommendation to do the study on carbon pricing. So for me, what's coming around is, it's about readiness. And I think part of the readiness is making the first paragraph statement. Part of the readiness, getting to readiness, is the study that we recommended, so that we're not in 3 years when the next study comes out behind the 8 ball saying, oh, you know, if only we had prepared more contingency. Those are my thoughts.
As language in the report, that first paragraph is fantastic.
Yes.
It gives us permission to then say, immediately following that paragraph, urgently to the governor, do not ignore our recommendations. Implement them without delay and in haste, because this is a serious problem. This is the permission we need to be really forceful, communicating force. Don't ignore these. Do them, implement them, put them into practice without delay. Because, and here's the language that we may be wanting to get to, because if we don't, and we're not successful, it may require more dramatic, transformational steps in the future.
That people aren't gonna be happy with. So
Right, so you just leave that out. You just leave that out. You gotta act now. We all gotta act now. Don't ignore this, or it may require a transformation of policy and economics that will be dramatic. And leave it there. But this paragraph really is a gift. This first paragraph is a gift to be extremely forceful in saying, do not ignore this work. Do not ignore these 51 net recommendations. This first paragraph justifies the 51 recommendations. And I think delivering that forcefully is a gift to us, and we ought to take advantage of it, rather than land on an argument whether there should be a cap or not. Regardless, we're going to have to do something dramatic if none of this works, or nothing works.
So you can shake his hand.
Am I forgiven for the abstention? Back in your good graces. Back in the circle of trust.
I have language, but other people have hand. I actually drafted that very language for my husband and I. So please, other questions?
So I think I would push back a little bit on that. We have done a lot. I don't think we've done much at all in the transportation sector. I don't know that we've made much headway at all in heating fuel. And so I actually think that the fact that this report is going to have some really strong recommendations in those areas is really significant, and is helping us as a state shift to the sectors that are outliers and are really the crux of the problem. And so I think from that perspective, it's really important to do what Liz was suggesting, which is to highlight this first paragraph, talk about the contributing factors and the fact that we need to shift priority and focus and attention to transportation and heating. To me, that's the most important thing that can come out of this effort, is that we can shift the laser-focused gaze we've had on renewables and the electricity generation, which is super important. But we've got to build capacity and solutions in these other sectors. And so if we can if that can be a really strong message out of this report, I think that would be a success. I personally really think that a cap is a good policy that can generate revenue to address some of these issues. But I also am conflicted as a Vermonter in that I know that the choices that people have to actually change behavior aren't there yet, and particularly in the transportation sector. It's going to be really hard for people to not drive their car. They don't have a lot of EV choices yet. They don't have a lot of options yet. We're in a rural state, and so I think we really have to build some confidence that if we're going to pursue a policy that's going to change, hopefully change behavior, that people have the foundation on which to make choices, different choices. And so, as much as I would be happy tomorrow to have a cap, I also recognize that there's more work we need to do so that people aren't stranded and just paying more to do what they're doing now. So I think that for me, really emphasizing the areas that we have to prioritize is really important coming out of this. And I would agree with Joe to say dramatic change, we need more aggressive measures if we can't make traction in these areas that have been really challenging for us as a state.
I totally appreciate that, and I appreciate your rocking out your eloquence. I appreciate that sentiment. I'm open to having that in there. A couple different things I would say, which is it is important to just underscore that we do need to focus on transportation and heating. We are doing that in here. I still don't think we have all the answers to how we're going to make some of these good recommendations happen. But it's also like it's challenging because it is these are unregulated sectors. So a policy that begins to incent or disincent or whatever, and I'm open to, the study. I'm very much looking forward to it, and I would hope that the results of the study would inform anything that might be required in 3 to 5 years. Again, I threw it out there as a starting point for a conversation, knowing that we are not winning. But I would also say, you look north to Quebec, and I would say they have a pretty picture. Their GDP is rising, and their greenhouse gas emissions are going down. Because by 2020, they will have invested in themselves, in actually helping people make those investments. So again, I'm not saying how to do it, I'm just recognizing that we need it. And then secondly, if we do have something more squishy and less precise, I do think the piece for me that is pivotal is accountability. And we don't, in clarity that we're actually going to be accountable to ourselves, to the charge that the governor put forward, to actually those sectors, like transportation and heating. We know that we need far more there. And I just am concerned that despite our very good work, we don't have all the answers, and it's not enough. 62% more required from 100,000 EVs, 100,000 heat pumps by 2025.
Well, I was going to point out that the piece that we haven't really talked about, and the piece that I think is going to rise pretty quickly in the public response to this report, is that we're not proposing any funding. And it is the piece of this policy, the cap and the revenue generation that we come from it, that provides a lot of the opportunity for a place like Quebec or California to spend billions on the kinds of things that you're proposing in here. But I feel like is that we've made a lot of proposals in here. We haven't funded a damn one. And I think that that's going to be a criticism, a public criticism. Now, there might be a lot of good policy reasons why we can't make a statement like this, but I don't think we're going to be able to ignore that particular issue when this report comes out. So I don't know really how to deal with that, because even if we acknowledge that somehow in here, I think that would be an admission to the fact that this is a big challenge, and these recommendations aren't going to do it. But it's partly because we haven't seen the commitment that it would take to see these things effectual. We're making some recommendations, but we don't have a revenue source. We don't necessarily have a governor who's likely to generate those revenues. Our legislature may play a role there, but how's that going? So that's what's frustrating to me, is that we're making all these recommendations, we're not putting anything behind it.
Chairman. I hear and I really appreciated what Paul said in framing. I think that I was really surprised when the A&R emissions brief came out. And I think we need to allow ourselves the opportunity to be surprised by that and know that this is new information. I've talked with folks across our network, analysts, people who follow this stuff. Some folks thought our emissions would be flat. Some thought that they might have gone down. But to see the extent to which they went up from 2013 to 2015, I do feel like it is game-changing, and it's been on a steady upward swing since 2011. And so I've heard the word credibility cost out, and the credibility of the process, and the credibility of the report. My feeling is if you get objective information like this before the report is finalized, if we want the report to be credible, we need to take it into account, as I think everyone is agreeing on in terms of their support for this first contextual paragraph. But then I do think that there's a danger of the devil in the details in terms of some of the language suggestions that have put out there. So for instance, Paul, you had said adding the phrase explore the viability of instituting additional measures such as a cap. But the language before that is, if nothing happens over the next years by 2021, I wouldn't want to suggest that we should wait another 3 years on an ever-increasing emissions trajectory to explore the viability of a cap. I mean, that's what the study was about, and we have an incredible amount of evidence already that the states like California or provinces like Quebec that have taken a measured, thoughtful approach to how to institute a cap in a way that's beneficial for their economy has led to emissions reductions, has led to economic growth, and has led to population growth, all things Vermont says it wants. So I think that we just need to be careful about kind of copy editing on the fly, because I wouldn't want to put across an idea that we wait another 3 years to explore instituting a cap, because we've already started down that road with the the study that the JFO's going to do, but I hear the intent behind what you propose, Paul, what many people around the table have said, and my feeling is for this process to have credibility, we need to be able to point to some opportunities to get to what was in the charge. And looking at the numbers, the objective analysis, I don't think these recommendations will add up given the new emissions numbers.
So can I just say that at this point, there's a motion on the table that I made with this first language, and then it was seconded, so that when we vote, which we need to do at some point, we need to vote on that language, and then if there was another proposal, that could certainly happen. But at this point, Jared, it is that, we're still talking about this language in terms of motion, so, and I'll leave it to Peter when he decides to close the discussion, because it's complicated.
I mean, this is a critical discussion. I hope nobody minds the fact that we're running over time, because this is the crux of our work, so it's important that we talk about it.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Jennifer was talking about, and I think a few others have hit on this first section. Looking at the report, I think we should hit, and the way it reads, I think we should sort of change some of that language in that first paragraph, because I think, and even looking at the pie chart, I'm sure everyone's read the report, but the pie chart on, page 7 shows that, if you take fuel and transportation, we're talking about 2/3 of what is driving our carbon use, and we really buried the lead in this paragraph. And if I was reading this as an outside person, I would say we have a massive problem in one sector, which I actually don't think we do, and then I would say, we have less of a problem in these other 2 sectors. And I think we can agree, if you look at the pie chart, 67%. I mean, I was shocked. Other sectors are a lot higher than electric generation than I would have thought. So I think that first paragraph needs a little bit of reworking to highlight some of the areas.
I had a thought about, one of the things that I was also, I think maybe Jared was alluding to this about, there is a decarbonization study happening, in part, because the commission made that recommendation and it was picked up by the legislature. I wouldn't want to undermine that or suggest that we need to do it again in 3 years. So maybe there's a way that we could reference that's happening. We don't have the information that's going to come out of that study, which would sort of lead to a conclusion that somebody's going to make, right? But maybe we could say, sort of reiterate that we think that's an important first step. Reiterate that it's an important piece of work that's happening and should be taken seriously to guide any future steps that may not have been addressed in this report. So basically saying, the study is happening that sort of lays the groundwork for a more thoughtful and informed response to any additional strategies that need to be undertaken by
by the state to meet our missions goals. And I think that one, it puts an emphasis on the study that was already endorsed by the commission. It sort of gives it the credibility that we hope that it will get by all of the policymakers that it will be delivered to, and then says that those findings should inform any additional recommendations or action. So I wonder if we could just sort of re-emphasize that work that's being done, that it's going to give us critical
I would make a suggestion listening to all of this. I think there's a combination of the various threads here that really makes sense. I like the somewhat reformulating to focus on the 2 priority sectors that we decided to focus on, right? Those are the 2 emission sectors that we focus on. Pull that out and focus there, and we supported on the other activities are supporting and can be reversing in other contexts. Something along the lines of the first paragraph, and then I like what Joe said. These recommendations need to, we need to move forward with these now. We can't delay. We don't, we're not getting there, and that's why we put the time and energy into coming up with these. And then I think there's an opportunity for us to circle back to our recommendation about the study in the leadership and investment section, right? In our conclusion, where it says we can be more forceful there and say we recommended a study to indicate to have it be better known what in Vermont what might be an economical way to drive investment in these sectors, right? And sort of unite the 2 discussions here. I get that it doesn't speak entirely to some of the accountabilities, but it speaks to the flavor of this discussion, which is around, we know that, and I'm okay with recognizing up front in this to say that these recommendations need to be moved forward with, but they're not going to be all and end all. To your point earlier, right? This is not do this and you're good. This is do this and keep thinking and keep working and keep innovating.
I wonder if that second paragraph can instead be a check-in point if it's not that it's saying we're putting these measures in place and a lot of things can change in however many years we set out, and at that point we want to check in. And so I'm wondering, I wrote a little bit of wording, based on this new information, the commission urges that unless there's significant progress in greenhouse reductions over the next blank years, we decide Vermont should institute powerful measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions informed by the study. And then just say, instead of a cap, say such measures can be used to generate revenue to advance economic activity, and so that it's left more open what we decide.
I guess I have an issue with the time frame, and I know it's that it plays both ways, right? It allows us to delay conversation, but it also allows us to check in. So I don't know, I struggle with that. Junior had something?
Yeah, I thought that was a wonderful suggestion. The only addition I would make to that verse is additional measures. Because I think these measures are
that's a good catch.
valuable, and I think they represent not just this thing in this group, but they can also consider how this group is constituted. This is a multi-dimensional group of people who can lead their voices, many different walks, and we've been able to find unanimity with the exception of one abstention. That is democracy.
There's a man of character sitting down there who.
Yeah, and that is democracy functioning. And so I'm very pleased to report that it is given to me that it's not a new thing. Peter, I think we've been struggling with your time correctly. I'm going to ask your patience because I want to speak to Paul's thoughts. Paul, this report is not the only thing we do.
No, I know.
And I think the point that I can't recall whether it was from Liz or Michelle or maybe Jennifer, who made the point about this being an opportunity to redirect thinking. I think that is absolutely key. I would just point to my own role for this. Since when I took office, the first thing I did was attend a meeting I was not invited to in the basement of AR about the use of VW solar electrification of the transportation sector. It was the early days of the administration, so we're all figuring out really work. But it was clear as day to me that that was where the department's attention was. The department that does utility, not transportation. But that we need to begin working on removing regulatory barriers to make these deployment possible, because this is such a urgent issue. And so I think you need to take some comfort in the fact that for your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, there are many other good forces that work on this issue beyond this. I am troubled by the way we are simply accepting as a given that we know we're failing, not because I doubt the integrity of AI's work, but because I'm used to testing data and understanding things before I accept it as a given, and I do it through the process other than reading the Vermont government report on this report. And that's all I've been able to read so far, so I haven't had the opportunity to study what AI. So this is all my way of saying, I think the group should be proud of what it's done. I'm hearing significant consensus around the table that there's a use to remains from substantial parts of the story which don't follow it. And I wonder if it got lost in the discussion that as much as I like the language you captured, Paul, about exploring liability though, I was at something more categorical, such as may need to consider a gap. And that's more in line with what Joe was saying, that if you don't do this stuff, you may need a building. So I just put that out there.
I think there's a knitting together of that exact sentiment. We have come up with ways to create that, to facilitate behavior change. What we may need to say more directly is that these are largely voluntary movements towards behavior change. More direct intervention may be required, and we believe it should be informed by the work of the JFO study right now.
Yeah, well, so let me say, I made the motion, and so the challenge is, and I'm not accepting any amendments yet, because it's all so fluid. So like Joe, I can't accept all these amendments and names, I don't know what they are. So I think we're gonna need to vote up or down on this, on the motion, so I'm not withdrawing it. And I really respect what you say, Julie, because there's goodwill and good work going on across the board, and I respect all of them. But I also was in the room when the last climate commission report was delivered. And I'm not naming names, but I sat with the key persons who it was delivered and saw the thank you. We're gonna do everything in here except the things that cost money. And I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've pulled together 20, 15 different policy groups to look at stuff. And I know that when a report comes out, half of it, 2/3 of it doesn't get done. May get done someday. And that the process is one of iteration and education, and we could try to just say nice things, and we can try to, we can also try to, we can go with what we've got. And I'm confident that there's 10 great things in this report, and then there's a lot of other work that can move forward, and that a lot is going to happen that we weren't foreseeing at all. But I'm not confident that we're going to meet, that we're going to have radically changed the mark, because I saw what happened 10 years ago, and it didn't radically change the mark. And I think that when you think about the scale of this as an issue from a civilizational point of view, and the fact that emissions are still rising, NASA, other people have been looking at this as a 40-year issue. This isn't a new issue where we're first starting to see emissions. We're seeing steady emissions rising for our lives.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
I know, and I'm not trying to put anyone in a difficult place, but for me, we have to be honest with ourselves in terms of our own history, which is that we're at a fundamental, and where we are proposing a number of positive things that are important, but that we also should be setting a mark to say, emissions at some point in our history We may get to a point where we have to say emissions can run this high, and then we're gonna stop them. And we're going to be reversing those emissions. And other places are doing that without cost to their economy. We should be thinking really hard about doing that now. And if we have that up front in our report, it may be rejected, but it will also be saying, this is really important for folks to be thinking about. And even if you reject it, you have to think about it. And so I believe that it's important that we vote on the motion, and I completely, again, respect and we'll be glad to have a debate with anybody.
Yeah, well, thank you.
The motion is
there any
to-
opportunity to amend the motion?
You had suggested a change, Paul, about explore the viability. You do that, then? Or do you want to leave it as it is?
Or could we look at
Someone could make a
language?
motion to, what's that?
Did you have language that amended? I guess I'm
Yeah, I
interested
really
in.
did. I don't know.
I almost wonder if we're back when Joe, because like this
Me
seems
too.
like a pretty substantial change and like,
So you might want to vote it down and start
Exactly.
again.
Could we-
Or you might
I
want
guess that
to,
was my
You can
question,
amend
what's
the
the
motion.
procedure?
Vote on the amendment.
Don't even know if we have an amendment though.
Well, someone could offer,
yes, so look it up.
and then you vote on the amendment.
So the motion was to get this into the report.
The motion was to add this to the introduction of the report.
And that's what you're suggesting should be voted up or down?
No,
You have to
but,
withdraw the
but
motion
people,
in order to, the original, whoever made the motion would have to withdraw it if we were going to, we either have to vote it up or down, there has to be a withdrawal of the motion, not an amendment.
You could move, somebody could move to amend and see if Paul would accept the amendment
that's
to
true.
add the language, the temporary language about the viability to the language that Chris wanted us to vote up and down. We could do that, but we could also, you know,
I'll
we
defer
could
to the
also say
lawyer.
up and down on this, and then somebody could make a motion with the new language.
Yeah.
Peter,
Is there a motion to amend that Paul might consider? Does somebody have one? Otherwise, I think we should.
I wonder about if Harrison had one, and extract the timeline.
Sure.
I do think a reference to
Let me read it too.
study, yes. The only other thing I was going to say, as you think about it, for me, from my perspective, a piece of it that we're trying to get at with the cap or whatever else was the accountability piece. Which I fundamentally believe has to be in there. Please read.
Based on this new information, the commission urges that unless there is significant progress in GHG reductions over the next blank years by blank, Vermont should institute additional powerful measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions informed by the JFO study. Such measures can be used to generate revenue to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge. In preparation for that potential end, the governor's administration should begin an evaluation this year of existing structures and potential partnership with other states and provinces.
We didn't even begin to talk about the fact that I have concern about us moving forward, setting a 3-year marker and then yet moving forward with our resources to explore these things. I mean, just, there's so much about this that's kind of cart before the horse in a number of ways that I struggle with.
And I'm just gonna say this. I think the urgency in that first paragraph, there's no human being that can read that and not understand the urgency. It's so clear, you make it very clear that it's in transportation that we have to get better, and in winterization and fuel use. We are giving them those things right up front, plus sequestration. I don't think we need this second part.
But if it doesn't work, what do we do? That's the, everything.
And my concern is that, again, there's so many of these recommendations that are good, but leave huge questions unanswered. To Robert's point, how?
Yeah.
Like,
I think maybe it
There's no
does
lesson.
make sense to vote up or down on this, and then if there's a different, if this doesn't pass and people want to try a different technique, that would maybe be the best way to do it.
I move to call the question.
Is that on?
I second.
the original wording or-
on the original.
The question is,
The original language.
should we include the language proposed by Paul into the introduction of the report?
With Harrison's amendment?
No.
As written.
Straight up.
Straight up.
As a reminder, we agreed at the beginning of this process that any such substantial changes would require a supermajority of the commission, which is at this point with let's see. And then I have Ted's proxy, so it's 12 members present need to vote in favor of something for it to succeed. So I guess that we can do a voice vote first, and if we need to do a roll call, we'll do a roll call. All those in favor of Paul's proposal?
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
We're counting on his eyes.
I think we should do a roll call.
All right.
Vision of the house.
Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Costello. Good for it. Ms. Audette.
No.
Ms. Boomhauer.
No.
Mr. Bushnell. Ms. Carlson. Mr. Coda.
No.
Yes. Ms. Long. Ms. Fleischman.
Yes.
Ms. Gill.
No.
Yes.
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 No.
Okay.
Who's the tally?
The motion fails.
Okay,
So accepting new,
Okay, we do it with the amended.
You can
Make a motion to accept it with the amended.
I need to hear it again.
yes.
Slowly.
Yeah.
Based on this new information, the Commission urges that unless there is significant progress in greenhouse gas reductions over the next blank years, we would have to decide by blank, Vermont should institute additional powerful measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions informed by the JFO study. Such measures can be used to generate revenue, to advance economic activity, to answer the climate challenge. In preparation toward the potential goal, the Governor's administration should begin an evaluation this year of existing structures and potential partnerships with other states and provinces.
So when you say the joint JFO study, probably you want to be explicit about what that study is.
So
we need
we have to move to accept that too.
Yeah.
There's no second yet, right?
Would that include the first paragraphs? Just want
Yes,
to
definitely.
clarify.
Yeah.
is there a second? Discussion.
Yeah, my only concern is that what you're saying is we're making all these recommendations, and here we just got a report that this shit's really hitting the fan here, and if this doesn't work, we're going to go with some really serious recommendations. I mean, it doesn't seem to me like there's like it's not like drastic measures, you know. I think it needs to be a little bit more dramatic to say, listen, folks, if this doesn't work, we're going to have to really put on our rubber boots.
How about things more like economy-wide measures to, that, you know?
And I think talking about it being with the JFO study sort of assumes that there's going to be some connection.
The problem with that would be that once this report is out, it's due by what, January? That's when the recommendations should be considered. If we put a time date in here that says, wait 3 years to consider recommendations that are coming in January, we're further punting the possibility for significant.
It was blank years.
Right, but if it was, I mean, if it
Not
was
gonna be
anything
blank years
beyond
in the
2019, then it would be further license for delay of the scale and pace of action that is necessary to align with what the charge of this commission wants.
I think one of the things that could resolve that is to just take out that qualifier that says, based on this new information, the commission urges Vermont should institute additional powerful measures. Just take out the deadline. I mean, if that's, like,
And
why
it's
put the
crystal
timeframe on
clear,
there?
it's so crystal clear in that first paragraph, and then we're laying it out.
I think we need to tweak that first paragraph. That probably isn't as big a deal, because I think we're all like,
I know.
we want to be really clear about the crisis and what's happening.
Yeah.
So that probably is less controversial, I'm guessing, but I just want to be clear, a large part of my vote is I really want to make sure that is framed properly.
May I make a suggestion that if we make this much simpler? That we is simply say, based on this new information, the commission urges, based on the lack of progress to date, that in addition to these important recommendations that need to be implemented, that we consider the outcome of the JFO study to inform future policy considerations that they continue to grab us for. Something along those lines.
That may continue to make measurable reductions accountable to our consensus goal.
Right, because I mean, the idea behind this study at the beginning was to say, you're not able to answer fully the question in line with our charge of, if we were gonna take an economy-wide action, a forcing action, which is the most in line with our charge, which has pieces around affordability and job creation and economic growth. We're not able to make a specific recommendation there. So I think we have to tie it back to the JFO study.
Well, and I think Harrison's done that. I actually support Harrison's motion.
Sure. Suggesting taking the dates out, just saying, regardless of, based on the information above, let's not set the trigger, let's just act on that once it's studied. You wanna suggest an amendment?
I'm not ready to suggest it. I'm just,
Yeah. Does seem tall.
do you have something to?
Bring us home, Joe.
I'm kind of okay with that, except the implication that any powerful measure, all powerful measures have as a common characteristic that the revenue generate.
The revenue change.
That the revenue generate. So for me, that's a no. But the rest of the language and the ideas behind it, I'm okay with.
So what if there's additional revenue generation? Let's go with that.
I mean,
The idea that all the steps you could
revenue
take
generating.
have as a common characteristic that they'll generate revenue is, I think, incorrect and also undesirable on some level.
and where much of this discussion has failed previous to us.
And that's why in some ways, the suggested language of a cap was even broader, because you could do, there are multiple ways to institute a cap and then bring down emissions that don't involve revenue generation.
But you could also permit a nuclear power plant.
Prevent
I mean, I think-
any new business from building zoning shopping and all, yeah. I mean, cap is not start, I mean, it's a non-start.
The cap isn't in the motion, so I guess I'm wondering what we want to do in the motion.
Could you read it again? I'm sorry to ask.
Yeah, do we want to change anything?
Just read
Okay.
it, just remind me.
Based on this new information, the commission urges that unless there is significant progress in greenhouse gas reductions over the next blank years by blank, Vermont should institute additional powerful measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions informed by the JFO study. Such measures can be used to generate revenue to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge. In preparation toward that potential end, the governor's administration should begin an evaluation this year of existing structures and potential partnerships with other states and provinces.
Can I just clarify, is the JFO study gonna come back with recommendations?
No,
No, it's just gonna give us.
it's gonna provide a foundation of information. I mean, to your point, I totally can appreciate, hence why the cap was just, there's many different ways to get there, and it's not gonna be potentially one single, silver bullet. That's, the cap is like, the market will figure it out, or there may be some economy-wide approach, there likely will be. But the other thing that I would say is, I do think it's important to reference the study. It could also potentially be important to reference that there's other ways to do it. The Massachusetts and Connecticut, as I mentioned, they have their Global Warming Solutions Act. Essentially, it says, these are our state goals, they're in statute, we are going to meet them, and
There's no guarantee that they make those either. I'm talking to the Massachusetts people all the time, they are freaking out because of all of the changes that need to happen at the individual level, they're never gonna meet those, they're not gonna meet those goals. But driven by that statute anyway.
okay, well, and, I'm still sort of struggling with laying out some really great things that are not answering fundamental questions. by.
Well, we are what we are, we get as far as we can get in terms of our consensus, that's
right,
So,
that's right.
my question to you is, the way that it reads with the, I'm okay with it. The part that doesn't make any sense is blank years.
Well, no, I know, I think we would have to decide that as a commission, because I don't know.
Or
So-
you could.
So here's a suggestion, based on this new information, the commission urges that unless there is significant progress in GHG reductions, Vermont should institute additional economy-wide measures, powerful measures, I'm not sure what comes before measures, to reduce GHG emissions informed by the JFO study, period. And just drop out the end part that talks about activities, getting started now. I mean, it sort of signals the fact that we are going to have to move forward with something, that the JFO study is going to be the trigger point that
Yeah, our
starts that.
conclusion already says, that last sentence in preparation for
Yeah.
this. The conclusion basically talks about partnership with the government, taking leadership regionally and nationally, not waiting. And so that's already there.
I think it's, I like what Michelle wrote simply because this language is different from the way we frame it in the conclusion. This language says essentially, regardless of whether or not we get to the trigger, we should do the event, we should start working on the linkage now. I think that's a more, the way, essentially saying our next step in the information gathering cycle is the JFO piece, which then informs our decisions going forward.
So could you read it? You're accepting her as a friendly amendment?
Sure. I think, is it okay if I include it?
Yeah, include that and see how that sounds.
Based on, here, wait, let me,
Slow.
right.
I would say economy-wide, I like that terminology.
People like economy-wide better than power. Okay. Based on this new information, the commission urges that unless there is significant progress in greenhouse gas reductions, Vermont should institute additional economy-wide measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions informed by the JFO study. Such measures can be used to generate revenue to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge.
So that, are you amending your motion to that?
Sure.
Is this a second vote to that?
To go to Joe's point though, I think the
last
additional
sentence.
revenue is not necessary to our point.
Yeah, I would leave off the last sentence now that I've heard it.
I mean, you could just amend it to say some, I understand what you're saying, like, they're not all gonna generate revenue, maybe. But very well may be need for revenue.
Right, but we're saying that the revenue is not the point, it's that
It's that they're dramatic,
It's-
they're economy-wide, and
yeah.
they're probably more creative than perhaps we can even think of.
What about,
To fix this problem, and it's not all about revenue.
Okay, so-
And then our recommendations, the revenue to support our recommendations, we talk about in the conclusion.
what if it's such measures can be used to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge?
That sounds good.
Can you read the whole thing again?
Yeah. Based on this new information, the commission urges that unless there is significant progress in greenhouse gas reductions, Vermont should institute additional economy-wide measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions informed by the JFO study. Such measures can be used to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge.
I don't think you need that last
I don't
sentence.
think
I don't think so either.
I actually like that last sentence. Me too. And I don't think we should need to put economy-wide in there because I think it's limited. We want additional measures, period.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
Okay, can you reread it, just that last line?
Okay. Do you want such measures can be used to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge? Is
I
that
think
the
this
conclusion?
sugar
straight.
makes the medicine.
Do we not want that?
I think it's fine, I like it.
I like
Okay.
it.
It's
harmless.
It is.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it hurts. Yeah.
The piece
All right, there we
of the economy-wide,
Do no harm.
the reason I was pushing for it is because I just want to underscore, and maybe we just are specific, in the heating, transportation, and even digital electric, so I just think the economy-wide for me just says, all energy sectors.
We're all
That's
in.
the way I interpret it, which is.
Do you wanna do wide scale?
Wide scale would be great, because frankly, economy-wide doesn't mean anything to me. I'm sorry, I don't
Is that
think
okay?
it's fourth.
Wide scale.
I'm missing another meeting already,
Lots of things that
and
mean.
I'm trying very hard to
All right,
close the gap.
should I read it one more time?
Yes.
Based on this new information, the commission urges that unless there is significant progress in greenhouse gas reductions, Vermont should institute additional wide-scale measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions informed by the JFO study. Such measures can be used to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge.
Sure.
I second that
I-
motion.
I really appreciate the thinking on the fly, and I wanna honor it. My concern is keeping in the language around unless there is significant progress, because.
There is language in there.
That's what I'm saying. My concern is that keeping that language in there, because if what we're now saying is we're gonna be looking at a report of 2019, what new information are we gonna get? Is there another A&R brief that's gonna come out in the next 3 months? No, so we know progress isn't being made, so I would just strike the language unless there's.
Wait, how do we know progress? I'm sorry.
No, I'm not, that's the whole point of this, the whole point of this conversation was as a backstop discussion, right? To say that these are our recommendations, and if things continue to get worse, we need to consider more options. So just to say that we're gonna do them is an entirely different conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of with you, Jared, actually. I think we should say, personally, I think we should say, do this report. This is, act urgently and rapidly and aggressively on these recommendations, and look at the JFO study and take additional action based on the information in that study. That would be what I would hope we would say, is something to that effect. It doesn't undermine their recommendations, because I'm a little worried that we're gonna undermine ourselves with the language we have.
June, you have a thought?
I do, and that is, with love and respect. I think that takes us way far away from where Joe was headed with his cry from the heart that I wrote down. And so I guess I see it differently. The way I see it is we've come up with recommendations that I believe in. And I've been trying, Jared, to figure out how we can help you pass the delay thing. I was thinking as a Machiavellian measure. Joey, are you listening?
My
That
ear.
we go with the dates that are here the next 3 years by 2021, because that must have been palatable to you at the outset.
Well, the whole thing.
Well, whatever, and Paul is behind it too. And I would point out that just because we put a time frame in there doesn't mean that we have to wait to act. So, and I think what we're coming up against here are the limitations of what we can do in this group.
Right.
And the time and resources that we have available.
That's
And I think we got pretty close with Harrison's excellent draftsmanship. I think it's time to stop cutting it with
Can you read it one more time?
Can
we all read it together one more time?
You decide.
Well, I did.
No, this is your motion, so you're making the motion in terms of the amendments that you're accepting
Right.
without the vote. So this is your motion to make.
Yep.
Harrison, I didn't understand that either. So, it's his motion to make.
Like, I guess you choose the wording of what you're saying.
Thank you. Okay.
I mean, I'm just, discussion-wise, do we want, unless there's significant progress in greenhouse gas reduction?
By 2021, is what June was saying.
Or do we want to just say, we want this to go hand in hand with the other recommendations?
What about, based on this new information,
The commission urges that
Vermont
like-
should,
Because that, I mean, then it's going hand in hand with the 50 whatever recommendation.
It's already a recommendation. Seems like it's odd to add it in there.
I don't know that it's so odd, though. The commission already voted for a study.
now we're just
We
saying
didn't-
that we should.
We're basically
use that
saying we should
information.
look at the study and act on it.
No, we're saying we should act on it, and that's,
The problem that I have with it, what you, I'm gonna vote no, whatever happens, but, we're accepting the study that hasn't been done, we don't even know who the vendor's gonna be. Could be complete crap from your side or my side, so why are we gonna accept their recommendations when we don't even have a vendor? It seems nuts.
No, I think this is to inform ourselves. By the study. Not like embrace it whole hog, just.
Yeah.
We'll all read the study.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I think we're gonna be informed by the study, we can take that information or not. So we're not taking the recommendations of the study, we're being informed by the study.
You want to read it as it is now, Harris?
Give it to us.
Without the, unless.
You decide. What do you think?
Well, it's your,
I think
Do it.
I
Give us
think
the
it's
latest
okay
version.
either way, really. I don't think it's critical.
now I'm totally confused, but I'd like to hear you.
We just like your voice there.
It's like to be yelled fast.
Okay. Can we, I mean, I want it to pass, so it's like, this is gonna be the deciding factor, this one phrase, can we vote on the phrase?
To give you comfort, it could fail, and we could try again.
Yeah.
We have all night.
All right, we'll start with, based on
Does
this.
anyone have a charger, a plug-in?
Let's
Lynette, go here.
Based
Based on this new information, the commission urges that Vermont should institute additional wide-scale measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions informed by the JFO study. Such measures can be used to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge.
So with that, I would firmly vote against it,
Because
because we
of
have
the-
now introduced a should that is very declarative. It commits
Instead of
us-
the unless.
It makes us recommend what they ought to do, and I don't think this process in this group has explored this sufficiently.
But would you support unless there is significant progress?
Yes, I would, but
Do other people feel similar?
there you go.
But there's
And that's
the-
why we've reached the limitations, and that's why.
Should we, let's vote on this one and then,
Which is the one we're voting on, the one that, where the unless is out, right?
yeah,
Okay.
I don't know how people.
I say.
yeah, so we're gonna vote on the motion that was just made by.
Wait, I want to be clear, you abstained.
I'm joking.
Okay.
So.
Because I'm not sure what I'm voting.
Hey, we should make sure that we're.
Let's be
voting on.
sure.
I do think it sounded like we were pretty close
Yeah.
a little while ago, so maybe we want to back up 2 steps. Maybe we have consensus, so we can go home sometime tonight. To try it one more time. And I have a sense anyway, Harrison, if you're okay with the way you had it earlier, and maybe we just leave out the next 3 years, based on the new information. I wrote down what you said, should I continue saying?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the commission urges it unless there's significant progress in greenhouse, but I just don't know when, I mean, the whole like buck stops here,
Let's
like.
leave the time out.
Time out.
Yeah, so let's just
Okay.
forget the blank and blank.
You ever written it down, Bob?
I do, I can try to
He's
read
got
back.
very neat, nice.
Yeah, read it.
Let's see. So this is what I think Harrison was saying, just 2 steps ago. Based on this new information, the commission urges that unless there's significant progress in greenhouse gas emission reductions, Vermont should institute additional wide-scale measures informed by the study, the JFO study, we need a better word for that. Such measures can be used to advance economic activity to answer the climate challenge.
Yeah, that's exactly what I had. The only difference was that after measures, I had to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but that is probably clear. You could add it just for.
I'm good with that.
I think it's good. One thing I do wonder about is informed by the study, we can just say, but it's also the piece here that, and an examination of other potential, I mean, it could be a little bit like other ways to make progress, just open it up. The study is one piece of information, which I think will be pivotal, but not singularly important. I mean,
That's a given.
The study and other emergent information.
yeah, there you go.
I don't think it's a given, it sounds specific to me, informed by the study, that we
And
don't know what it's
other-
gonna say.
And other
Okay.
emergent.
information.
Yeah.
study can just be identified by the bill, like it was required by some act.
I believe we can
Call
call
the
it
J.
Yeah, so that's no-
decarbonization study, and it will probably be sufficient.
Yeah.
So is that your motion?
You want to read that again? Or you don't have to read it, but does it have the, so it's,
You read
It
it.
has the unless in there, correct?
it has the unless and it has,
Okay,
okay.
is there a second on that motion?
I will second the motion.
Any, I'm gonna call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Aye.
Yes, it
So,
does.
okay, there's 3 no votes, Bethany, or sorry, not Bethany, Jared, Matt, and Marie.
What about abstentions?
Abstentions? Joe, are you clear on the language?
I voted yes. God, yes.
So let's keep moving.
Motion
What else
passed.
do we need to do today?
Stop, yes.
Drink beer.
So there are just a few more sort of next steps. Obviously, if you have edits, please send them to me and to Paul, and we'll sort of divvy up as it goes. I think that there's some question about whether or not, if you're gonna send edits to the group leaders and some of the important staff who've been supported, I would include me and Paul on that so that we can, if there's not time, somebody's on vacation, whatever, we can make sure that edits are considered and get in.
When do you need those by?
And the other thing is when group leaders are receiving recommended language that you're accepting into your report, you should send it to Peter and I, still in red line, so that it's clear and obvious the changes that have been made, and we can be sure that we're all in tune with the consensus of the whole group.
And I think those have to be done by the end of next week.
Okay.
And I will do my darndest to get you guys a draft or final before we meet with the governor, but I am out all of next week, that's why I'm giving you some additional time. And then I'll be traveling some of the following week, but I will get it done.
Can I ask you a question? I know this
Yep.
is frustrating to go back for 1 second, but would this pass without the unless or no?
It does.
No, I mean with,
You made the motion with it
unless.
unless, so it doesn't,
I don't know.
there's no way to know.
Well,
We'll never find out.
Buttonhole, everybody. I recommend getting a case of beer before you. You did a
He's
very
too
good
young to
thing.
buy
Yeah, you didn't just suggest an 18-year-old buy a case of beer, did you?
Actually, I did not suggest it at all. I suggest you have a case of beer. Adults can purchase it and give it to them.
Let's please
You
wrap
would
up,
not be
please.
consuming it.
This is a classic example of this group, and we like to hear ourselves talk. I think the only non-commission or state representative we have left in the room is Mr. Farnham. Do you have any public comment that you would like to make?
No, thanks.
Unless.
I'm sorry, Peter, I'm just gonna derail your process for a moment and say I think it's important to give some love to Harris and for the leadership that he exhibited.
Russ,
Very
yeah.
This is the last convening in this group.
This is the last meeting in this group.
I just want to say, on behalf of the Agency of Transportation, it's really been a pleasure to work with everybody on this commission. I've worked on a lot of commissions before, and this group has had a lot of diversity of opinion and has had great patience and taken pains to work through a lot of complex issues, and it's just been fun working with all of you.
You're here.
And in honor of that, you can keep your name tent. And then, following the adjourning of this group, which will last for a second, several of us are interested in going to the Down Home Cafe on Main Street, Montpelier, to sit outside and have a cocktail. If anybody would like to join us.
Including Harrison.
Or non-alcoholic.
Or not, a virgin cocktail, if you will. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to
The Vermont Climate Action Commission. Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
So it's called down home kitchen?
Order.
That's like right off of our state.
Yeah. We lost.
Jared's gone.
It's fine. Well,
Oh, his stuff is here.
oh yeah. We'll get him. We don't have everybody.
Oh, Jared, you have that.